Dr. Elijah Munyi is a political economy and all manner of development expert, and he's here with us in the studio this morning. Good morning, Dr. Ari.
Good morning, Eric.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
How are you doing? How was your jumping of the year?
Very good.
Those are the greetings in Kenya.
Very
Umevuka
good.
vizuri.
Yeah. We went to pay homage. We went to the village, spent time with parents. Parents spend time with grandchildren. So we are very happy for their 2 days or 3 days. The grandparents and grandchildren bonding for 2-3 days. Yeah, and we are back
to face a new
to look for fees.
To look for fees. And today's editorial cartoon has this vehicle, and the rear view mirror is basically showing the festivities, and then the front is showing Uko ahead, a signpost, back to reality.
Yes.
So you're back to reality.
We are back to reality.
And the festivities are now on the rear view mirror.
Yes.
Life is back where you had left it.
We have already budgeted for the January salaries because we promised teachers that is what we will use to pay. And we really enjoyed the December ones because these time schools are really opening late.
Someone was asking that salary that they received in mid-December, was it meant to take them up to the end of the month?
What was it for? What was it for?
But you can get something by the way, Dr. Now that you're here and you're talking about school fees. Ndu, tell him.
So Kiwi is doing the business and they're saying step up and shine with Kiwi. This all you really have to do. These two gentlemen, I'm still waiting for them to go.
Okay.
So all you need to do is go to your favorite.
Can you think we're going to buy and give
you
it?
have told me. Did you go?
Yeah.
Tell the truth and shame the devil.
I bought.
You did? Why didn't you tell me?
I'm still waiting for it. It was during the time when we were on a break.
So you don't have a phone, Abi?
To do what?
To call me and tell me that you did the deed. Anyway,
sitaki kukusumbua ukiwa holiday.
Oh, please. Kiwi Black specifically.
Yes.
At your supermarket.
Yes.
When you buy it, you could buy this one or you could buy the 50 ml, which is then 40 grams, right? *459*5#.
Yes.
When you open the lid, there's going to be a code there. Then you're going to send the code and follow the instructions. Immediately, you get airtime or bundles, whichever one it will be.
Okay.
And then you also get a chance to enter the draw. And they're giving away 35,000 shillings every week. They started in November up until the 7th of February. You get a chance to win 35,000 shillings in school fees. It would do something, wouldn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And definitely, I mean, Kiwi is always on the list.
You're going to buy anyway. So imagine you're going to buy anyway for school. And then they're saying, for the school you're buying it for, we can even help you with school fees.
Increase your chances, by the way, just by buying more tabs this time.
Step up and shine with Kiwi.
With Kiwi. Okay, and then you can instead of buying one big one of 100 ml, you can buy
two small ones.
Two small ones. Those are two chances.
The chances are this. No, they're more.
Yeah.
Okay.
Two chances.
Okay.
Yeah, clever.
They're not looking at the size of the tin.
You're looking at the number.
It's the tin.
As long as you bought Kiwi.
Yes.
Daktari, back to reality, back to the things that are happening. And of course, we know there are people who have said, expect tough times going ahead, expect things to get tougher and tougher. The president has already said, all right, some of the things that were happening previously were just costing the taxpayer a lot of money. And that's why he's removing those subsidies. He said subsidy on power was costing us 25 billion shillings. And it was not even making a change. So let's just remove that. Subsidy on what? Unga. Who even got that unga? Remove it. Let's take that money into buying fertilizer and actually helping farmers to plant. But if we look at the grander scheme of things that are happening in Kenya and around the African continent. Zambia. Okay. Ghana on Monday suspended payments on most of its external debt, effectively defaulting as the country struggles to pay its cavernous balance of payments deficit. The ministry said it will not service debts, including its Eurobonds, commercial loans, and most bilateral loans, calling the decision an interim emergency measure. That is what was happening. And then now the World Bank has decided, you know what, let's actually do this. Let's come in and sort out these guys because they need help.
Yeah.
Zambia got into financial distress
Yeah.
early last year. We know that, our Treasury has told us, no, we are not yet at that kind of stage. And in fact, we're even getting support already from the World Bank and IMF
Yes.
in terms of, budgetary support and all. But what's your outlook? What's your crystal ball showing you?
Tough. So we are a high distress, high risk debt economy. So in a sense, we are not very different from Ghana. The difference between us and Ghana is sort of that we have not waited to default like Ghana did. And actually, Ghana, the IMF met the Ghanaians on the 1st of December. And I highly suspect that actually Ghana's default is a policy advice of the IMF. And that comes as a condition for the IMF to step in. So the on the 19th of December, just 2 weeks ago or 1 week ago, Kenya got ahead because Kenya had its loan approved by the IMF, which tells us that we have gone through the IMF and they are quite confident that we can hack it. But tough ahead. Because what essentially for Zambia, Ghana, all these countries you're mentioning, Kenya, essentially what is happening, I think in a way, very unfortunately, very quietly, we are getting back to the 1990s. IMF is in control. It's an era of structural adjustments. So the subsidies you're mentioning, for example, top of IMF list, they are going. So petrol subsidies, I'm even wondering if the fertilizer subsidies will really stay. But essentially, that is a very low-hanging fruit for IMF policy recommendation. Get rid of the subsidies, reduce government, increase revenue, so taxation goes up. So it's going to be really tough because you're increasing taxation while you're removing the subsidies.
You've said something which I find interesting in a confusing way. Increase revenue, increase taxation.
Yes. Yes.
How does that work?
Tighten the belt. That works simply because that is essentially structural adjustment. That is what balances your books as a government.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, if it balances your books and you have a government that, yes, maybe they're not going to borrow from IMF, but they will borrow internally. All right?
Yes.
Now, if they do that, they're already doing that, right?
Yes.
So, does that not stem the flow of these same finances for the rest of the people who are in the country? Or does it not matter? Even if the government borrows, there's still money that people in the business sector, individuals can borrow, so that the liquidity that we're speaking about is actually available.
That argument has been put forward, and I don't completely agree with it.
Please.
But anyway, for this government, the strategy is, I think, slightly different. Part of the reason Ghana is going into this kind of problem is generally when countries borrow internally, domestically, they borrow a lot from the banks.
Yes.
The strategy now is to move a little bit away from the banks and borrow mostly from the savings funds, the NHIFs and the NSSF, the funds, the pension funds. That way, it is seen that the banks will still have their money, and I think that's a better way. It's a better way. For the banks, that argument has been given, but when you look at the last 5-10 years, when government has been borrowing a lot from the banks, would we say, and this is countering that argument, would we say that anybody who wanted to borrow lacked, was unable to borrow?
The thing is, in this country, it's a question that you can easily respond to by asking the question, where exactly do the majority of Kenyans borrow from? Is it banks? Is it SACCOs? Is it informal chamas? What is it? You see, there's when you talk about the informal sector in this country, let's say the informal sector as it's viewed by, say, the international lenders, right? The hidden economy, as it was once upon a time called, it has been, in many ways, the driving force of an economy such as ours. This so-called informal way of doing things. Yes. Now, when you talk about banks, that's the formal way of doing it. So you start off with a question of how many Kenyans actually have bank accounts. You start there.
Yes, and it's quite low.
It's extremely low.
Yeah. Okay. So that is, again, to sort of answer your question, in terms of the formal sector, the formal banking sector, I don't think sort of formal private sector was starved of cash or starved of capital because government was borrowing. Actually, the banks found it more interesting and more profitable to buy treasury bonds from government.
Right.
So, but still, the strategy now is to move a little bit away from that. And as for the informal ones, I think we do have an answer. Maybe many of us is SACCOs, and the really low segments is the mobile money.
The micro-lenders.
So, I mean, looking at the Ghana example, because look, I think that oftentimes we have examples of, economic stars or, on the other side, burnouts that we can actually look at and say, look, folks, there's something we can do about this. Just 24 short months ago, Ghana was known by the rest of the world as Africa's rising star economically.
Yes.
The current Minister for Finance, Kenneth Atta, said the same thing that the Treasury, in those 24 months ago, said the same thing that Treasury is saying in Kenya today, that everything is okay. He gave Addo, the president, his reassurances that everything was all right. And here we are looking at 50% inflation in Ghana in November 2022.
Yes.
So first I wanted to ask you, I mean, oftentimes we have these conversations and people might say, inflation, okay, what is that? So when we say that a country economically was doing well, the currency in comparison to the dollar is was phenomenal in terms of the exchange rate. One of the strongest currencies on the continent at that time. And now we are saying you can't pay your loans. People cannot buy food at what they're buying it for 3 times more than what they used to buy. Your basic commodities in Ghana today, in your 3 major areas of Accra, Kumasi, and Ashanti. Why? And first of all, what does it mean when we say 50% inflation? Number 2, what does it then portend for an economy and how then they're able to survive? And then what parallels can we draw with what we are currently seeing in Kenya today?
I'll try to follow.
Okay.
But the first one, which I think you're absolutely right, is this idea of the star economies. And Ghana has been there. And it's interesting. One of the questions I keep on wondering is what happened to Botswana, for example. Yeah, it was always a star. But in fact, Ghana is an example of a crisis of success. Those 24 months you're saying, 2020, around 2020, Ghana sold a lot of sovereign bonds, the Euro bonds. That was the time when it was the star. And the Euro bonds were, I think it's got the biggest Eurobond purchase in Africa. So $14 billion. Phenomenal. Kenya has, I think, 1 billion. Ghana has 14 billion.
Wow.
And actually the biggest problem of the debt has been the Eurobonds the interest rates are so high. This is again what our president was saying here. Like, we really need to have a target of what is the maximum we are willing to pay for interest for any loan, anywhere, internal, external, and so on. So the external commercial borrowing, which is the Eurobonds, essentially, are part of the biggest problem that has brought Ghana to where it is, because the interest repayments alone are more than 70% of Ghana's collection income. Yeah, the interest payments alone. Yeah. So this is where Ghana is a star, which became a victim of its stardom.
But then you have to ask, was it really then a star? Because how do you get into a position where, I'm simply asking from an economic perspective, where you make such a decision to borrow with the sort of terms that we're referring to, and in a foreign currency, when you know full well that once you borrow in that currency, or was this before COVID? Or are we saying that when COVID then came in, everything was up in the air?
Disrupted everything,
their
plans.
It was early 2020, so just around when COVID is beginning.
Yes.
And the stardom is essentially, it's a very self-fulfilling thing. The minister could have said what you said, and because when you go and tell somebody, look, give me 100 shillings in dollars, give me $1 today. In 3 years' time, I'll give you 150. Yeah, so it's a very good interest rate. So the fact that it was oversubscribed, actually they wanted only $3 billion. They got 14. That was another boost of how well they're doing.
Yes.
But then that comes with a very high repayment. And this is why generally, when you look at CT, you mentioned the internal borrowing. Generally, that is the direction we have to go. Because anytime you borrow externally, you're borrowing in another currency, a foreign currency. And this currency issue is our biggest problem. So the external borrowing, external commercial borrowing, not bilateral or multilateral. For example, Rwanda is one of the countries that doesn't have a very high risk. It borrows a lot. But what Rwanda is doing is borrowing basically multilateral. It's all IMF, World Bank. So we will borrow. We will keep borrowing, but some of the stars like Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, we've been feeling good and wanting to go
to the market,
to the market, commercial, external. But these are loans coming at 15%, 20%, and you can get the same from World Bank at 0.75% for 40 years. So in a sense, it's a very interesting game that is going on. And again, why I don't think Kenya will go the route of Ghana is. We've got such a high bilateral debt, China. I mean, I think World Bank doesn't want to mess with China for now. So our default essentially would be defaulting Chinese debt. It's such a bilateral issue that I think even at the multilateral IMF level, they don't really want to interfere. So I think the strategy for now has to be take it easy on Chinese loans more and just try
borrow less from China.
Borrow less from China.
Start diversifying your sources.
Yes,
and by diversifying sources, come to us.
Yeah.
But wait, did our status as an economy not change? Did we not become a middle-income country?
We did.
And if I'm to believe what I've heard, does that then not determine who we can borrow from and how we can borrow?
I think it only mostly matters in terms of World Bank. So you're bumped up into a commercial level, which is actually less advantageous. So you move from the IDA to IBRD, which is...
I really would like to understand this.
Yeah.
How did we acquire this status? I mean, it's been explained to me, but I don't understand it. Because we live here. Do you feel that we are a middle-income country? I mean, when you sit and think and look, do you feel that you are a middle-income country?
Yeah, an expressway.
When we take all the money in the country and divide by our population, the figure comes to more than $1,400 per person.
That's how they work it out.
That is how you work it out, simply.
I mean, surely.
That arithmetic is faulty.
So the arithmetic is okay. I think.
What do you think is faulty? Is the number of people faulty? What are those two?
Yes.
You're not. You know,
is it the amount of money or is it the number?
It's not representative.
You know, a good number of people who
Or
don't
they
have
use
this
the wrong sign.
$1,400.
They should have done a square root instead of a divide.
No. It is not representative in this sense. If 1% of the country, I'm using this as an example, okay, on 95% of
The wealth.
or the wealth we have, and then you do the arithmetic and tell us we're in a middle-income country. That's what I'm saying. That arithmetic is faulty because it's not representative in any sense or in any way.
Or are we dealing with a suspended dream issue here? That, okay, ideally, if you were to divvy up the amount of money that the country says it has, if you were to divvy it up amongst the people who exist in the country, this is what it would look like. And so based on that, we can only then prescribe Kenya to be a middle-income country. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, that's what we're saying, basically. And you know, there's somebody who said the mathematics of average is very deceptive. If you put a man's, let me say a woman's, because I was going to ask you about the proverb, and if you put a woman's head in a fridge and another one in an oven, then probably they would tell you the
environment.
The average is okay. Yeah. But essentially,
one is freezing.
One is freezing. One is
exploding.
So it's faulty. I think you're right in terms of that is just an average. The distribution of that income in the country is terribly skewed. But going back to the question about inflation, I think it's a question that, in my view, we are not addressing enough.
Sure.
Because why does your money lose value? Or why does your money gain value? It's basically on how much you're trading. How much is the shilling demanded is a function of when a guy goes to when a guy goes to wherever, brings dollars, they have to change those dollars into shillings. Yeah. So what pushes the price of the shilling up is the demand for the shilling. The demand for the shilling is a function of how much trade we are doing. So partly, Ghana, what has happened in Ghana? I think they have, is it stopped their cocoa exports or something?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's the same conversation we should be having in Kenya, but I don't think we are doing enough on that. So our trade policy should be very, 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 very closely aligned to our fiscal policy. The way to escape from the fiscal problems will be partly resolved by MITI, by our trade policy, and how much we are exporting. We are so keen on saving, but I don't hear as much keenness on expanding. If we had targets, for example, let's upgrade our trade exports by, if we just had 2% increase in trade volumes, we sell goods about $6.5 billion a year.
Yeah.
If we just increase that by even a percentage a year or 2% a year, we would actually resolve a lot of the fiscal issues we have now. So, and interestingly, this is where I find it interesting because I don't hear much. This is where I thought probably the office of Musalia Mudavadi would have come in over the campaigns. You know, he sounded like this economic guy, this economic.
He was the economic guy.
He was the economic guy. Save, sell, tax.
Yeah.
Tax comes the last one.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of emphasis on taxation now. So we need to save as a country so that we provide the pension funds and so forth for the government borrowing. But first, we need to sell. So sell, save,
And
tax.
then tax.
Okay. I agree. But then ask yourself, what do we actually sell?
I think this is it.
What
I
are
know.
our exports?
What? Yes.
Okay, let's take a break on that note.
Yes.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
So that question by CT. So what is it that we export? We know we export flowers, we export coffee, we export tea, we export human resource. Okay, we start with, we export human resource, and we export flowers, we export tea, we export coffee. What else do we export?
Nothing answers more than labor exports. Yeah. And interestingly, a lot of these labor exports now are actually in the lower level, Middle East, Gulf. So these women we are sending to that place are bringing us a lot of money. And they're supporting a lot of economic activity, school, medical, and so on. So that is 4.1 billion, which is just 2 billion short of the amount of money we get from everything else we sell. So remittances are big. And as part of our saving, so we said sell, save, tax.
Yeah.
As part of our savings, I think we really need to think about these remittances. How can we hold them in a common pot where they can also be utilized in a constructive way, maybe beyond the consumption? But then, yes, tea, flowers, tea. We sell tea as far as Afghanistan. So
Pakistan,
Pakistan, is
Egypt,
big.
locally here,
Yes.
elsewhere.
Yes. So
But that discussion about the value addition, that conversion is still ongoing, is it not?
It never moves, man.
Yes. And when you talk about tea or coffee, again, same conversation.
Value addition.
But actually, let me ask this question. There is this conversation, even as we're talking about the $14 billion that Ghana borrowed.
Yeah.
What did they use that 14 billion for? What was it for? What were they borrowing for?
Yeah. Good question.
And you see, the question that is going to follow is, did they do what they said they were going to do? Because if you borrow money for economic development, my understanding is this: it's supposed to help boost your economy to the point where the repayment of this money that you borrowed becomes easier. So it shouldn't be a problem. Yeah, the borrowing should not be an issue, because it's supposed to help generate a lot more money than your economy has before the borrowing. So now when you have the opposite happening, you borrowed money and the economy is not producing more. It's more or less where it was before you borrowed.
Partly, it could be two things. I'm not very sure. But it could either be, at best, it might be like us, infrastructure, roads which have not yet, I suppose, in a way, started to generate that income.
Yes.
Or expenditure, also like us. So you borrow money to pay for health, to pay police, to pay and so on and so forth. So it's budgetary allocations, which a lot of it is you buy cars, you pay the police and so on. So you find yourself in the same hole. So I think it's a really good question. And why I remember one time I said here, we need to attach the borrowing to what you're saying, to economic generation.
Sure.
Yeah, we need to say, once we borrow these $2 billion, it's because these $2 billion in 5 years can probably generate almost the same amount of money.
It's true. We do borrow money for infrastructure development, but we also borrow for other economic activities. You see, now, even as we're building roads, the roads have a purpose. I mean, it's taking you from point A to B, but there's some economic activity in A as there is in B.
Yes.
Now, the moment this road is built, what we then assume is that the activities will then be enhanced as a result of the road, isn't it? But do we see this happening? Now that we've built the roads, whatever it was that made us want to improve the roads, do we see an improvement in that? Because if there is indeed that, then this issue of do we have enough money to pay would not be even a discussion, because we would have enough money.
Yeah, to some extent, yes. The roads, I would say the roads are working.
Yes.
There's improvement. So we can see, for example, where I come from, there's a lot of new economic activity in Leaf that's called Mogoks. That is very easily brought to the city.
It gets to the market before it dries.
It gets to the market, and it's a 24-hour
Economy
thing. The only problem we have is that the roads are so good that the cars drive too fast. So I suppose, they work. So the problem likely is the expenditure when you're borrowing.
Precisely.
Yeah, when you're borrowing for paying teachers.
In the previous hour, we had a conversation about planning generally, and saying that when you look at a country's national plan, that there's so many details then that must go into this. And here we are looking at issues, you say, save, sell, and tax. If we look at the countries today that are economic powerhouses on the globe, there is none of them that doesn't manufacture and sell. None. Doesn't matter whether they have small populations or huge populations. If they're amongst the top economic powerhouses, they manufacture and they sell. And that was something that they did years ago. It didn't start just 10 years ago. They started this practice a long time ago. And if we're going back to the Ghana example, we know Ghana, it's cocoa. Ghana, it's gold. Now, on the cocoa side of things, they said, okay, fine, we're going to close the taps on the export of cocoa to these countries who then go and they make the fine chocolate and the cocoa powder, and then they sell it back to us. So we're going to stop export of cocoa. But there was no plan about mechanization, for example, or what they were going to do with their cocoa in the interim. We don't hear now that Ghana is doing Accra fine milk chocolate. We don't hear anything like that. To me, do you think, would you rather, or if you look at that kind of economic activity, wouldn't you then say, fine, we can see your long-term plan being eventually that we will manufacture and sell our own cocoa globally and internally, continent-wise, wherever, but we are living out the plan in the interim. So we may not close the tap immediately, but we know that that's the plan. Because now you're sitting with cocoa, you're sitting with debt. Outside they're saying, okay, we'll find cocoa somewhere else. China will go and start planting cocoa trees for, So, I mean, what would a plan implemented, what should it look like?
In 1978, Deng Xiaoping comes to China. the relations with the United States are not any better, even today. But in the years that the Deng Xiaopings of Asia are building their countries, they're so pragmatic. You fight smart. So all these countries which have developed, Japan, China, Koreas, and so on, even the Middle East, they have all depended on the biggest economies at that time. This is to say, China, even with its, ambitions for global domination but it was so clear that they needed to be smart, like you're saying, you're suggesting. So I think part of our problem is we don't need to be belligerent and sort of, this fighting with the people, even though we think they're exploiting us. Yeah. So, and this is where I was mentioning, do what Botswana did, for instance. Botswana is 90% dependent on diamonds for their public, for their income. And one company controls all that, De Beers. De Beers used to get the raw diamonds, take them to London, polish them and sell them. And what they said, Botswana was smart. They said, look, we will keep your monopoly, but come and polish in Botswana, in Gaborone. So it's an interim. It's sort of in the middle. So these diamonds are now polished in Gaborone as Botswanese exports. I don't know where you say Botswanese or Botswana exports. Yeah. So that brings the money. So I think that is where we are lacking for Ivory Coast and Ghana. We've had actually this cocoa debate since the 1960s. They tried to form a cocoa cartel. It didn't work, and it's the same for us. Going back to what we export, tea, flowers, those are the ones we know, labor, and so on. Gold is something that we don't talk about a lot, but we're actually exporting a massive amount of gold here. Gold and mining has now become the fourth biggest export. And that doesn't include petroleum, refined petroleum, which we are also exporting a lot. So I think it's a matter of being pragmatic and say, where do we make our money? Let's concentrate on that.
Focus on those.
Let's focus on those. The tea and the flowers are generally okay. So if it's about the gold exports, is it possible to, and much of this is going to China anyway, is it possible to work with China on how they can polish or refine the gold here and the petroleum for us? So we can be pragmatic, and those are the things that I thought that would be the mandate of the Musalia Mudavadi ministry in terms of broad economic thinking. Because partly when he was campaigning, he talked about government waste, for example. So partly saving is where can we cut on government waste? Yeah, and I think he had a figure. I don't know whether it was the 2 billion that Uhuru talked about last time, but we can save a lot, and it's better if we did the saving out of our own decisions as a country
than being forced
by IMF, and they're going to. Yeah. So this removal of subsidies is partly not really as wanting, but to get the 447 billion which we are now being given, 447 million, it's a condition.
Daktari, the discussion when people talk about economic growth, there's always a discussion about industrialization, always. Okay, export driven, etc., etc. But there is a discussion that I think should go alongside it and should be given even more emphasis. Of what use are all these things when you are not talking to us and telling us how you're going to feed your people, and how it is you're going to make food affordable, and how it is you're going to enable people to be able to buy what they need? Meaning, this shilling that we have, even if you get, say, 3,000 shillings a month,
yes,
if that 3,000 shillings a month can feed you, then you have a good shilling.
Yes.
But if you keep saying you'll be given more money, and yet the more money buys you less, because what it's supposed to buy isn't in enough quantities, then the emphasis on what it is that in my mind is fundamental, then these infrastructure projects, the roads and what have you, become to me white elephant projects. Because of what use is a good road, a good super expressway, if we cannot feed people? Of what use is it?
It's not good. And that brings us again to two things. One is production, what we are doing to enhance our maize production, if that's the main thing we eat, or cows. And the other one is trade. So the question I think that we are struggling with as a country is, when are we more food sufficient? When is food cheaper? Is it when we import from Uganda and Tanzania and other places? Or is it when we grow our food? I think that's the discussion that I would say in terms of food we are not very sure about.
Right.
Could I ask the question, why is our food expensive? Why is it? Well, why is it that you ask the question, why is it that we import from our neighbors? Because it's cheaper.
Yep.
Cheaper.
Yes.
So why is ours more expensive?
Yes.
And you see, that's the question, because everything that goes into the production of our food has an element that adds this expense to it that is not discussed as loudly as it should.
Yes.
The cartels, as we call them, that are in this sector. There's always someone controlling something. There's always a group of people controlling something, whether it's fertilizer, whether it's what. So everything that the so-called farmer or the person who's supposed to add value does, it doesn't matter what they do.
Yeah.
Sure. But, Doc, if you look at then, because now, as we have a solution-driven conversation about what needs to happen, would you say that, it's formulaic in answer? That is there a formula from an economic point of view that you apply this formula and it will work? My father used to say that mathematics with a formula, it doesn't matter if it's the brightest person in the class or the least in the class, apply the formula, it is going to work.
Yeah.
Right? Would you say if Kenya were to do this with A being A and B being B,
Yes.
And
if
K
Kenya-
being constant.
voila, if you did that, this would work? Could we look at the situation and say that today, every day we're looking at it now, isn't it? At the beginning of the year, cost of living, blah, 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 what they're going to do. CSs are meeting in a few hours. What would it be to say, apply this and it would work? What would you want?
I think there's a formula, and it's so simple that it's deceptive. How do you grow wealth? That's the primary question. You sell something. You trade in something. So in economics, the thing we call economic growth or GDP is the primary thing. So I think the emphasis ought to be on how do we increase our output and our export volumes and our trade. I think that really is what would bring us the money. Then we can have those conversations about how do you grow capital. Once you have sold things, out of 3, eat 1, save 2, or eat 2, save 1. So the formula is there. You get something, you get a revenue, you save. The saving,
Kula tano weka tano.
kula tano weka tano, ama hata kama ni tatu. That becomes capital. That is what you invest on the roads, that what you spend on health and so on and so forth. And then basically the rest is now social health, education and so on. So I think what probably this government can do is ask this question of government expenditure, for example. Is there something we can do about it long term? Not just the 5 years of Ruto or the 10 years of Ruto. Yeah. So like we did with the Vision 2030, can we work on? And I remember, I think when Uhuru came in, there was such an austerity measure for government officials. I think cars and so on and so forth.
No, bro, that austerity measure is just a discussion. It's something every
But the
government...
cars came now.
No,
Cars came. Did you see the cars? The silver ones.
What? The Passats?
Yes.
That was when Uhuru was
Yes.
finance
That's when he was finance minister.
Yes.
Yes. That's the one you're speaking of, right?
Yes, that's
Yes.
the one I'm
Believe
speaking
me,
of.
it's a completely different discussion when you want to find out whether those were the best buys we could have in terms of what purpose they were supposed to be. Why I'm saying the austerity measures are a discussion is because austerity is something you experience. Okay? When I say experience, for instance, if you tell me that the government is going on an austerity measure, right? I would ask, okay, what will it look like?
Yes.
Okay?
No more flowers and mandazi in offices.
No,
in the
no,
morning.
forget that. You just forget that. Where does government spend most of its money apart from salaries? You look at that. Do we still have those things? The answer is yes.
Yes,
So
still
where's your austerity measure?
Yeah. So if the answer is yes, then and that's a good question. So
Yes.
keep the salaries.
Yes.
Keep the salaries.
Yes.
What else? So for example, allowances
Yeah.
and Naivasha.
Yeah.
Allowances and I love it.
Allowances and Naivasha. Yeah. Can we do you come to Work City here
Yeah.
every morning, yeah?
Yes.
And you're working. I don't know whether you get allowances here.
Allowance to come and work.
Yes.
Where? Here.
Exactly. So where did this culture come about?
You see, the allowances aren't even the issue if you ask me. No.
Yeah.
The per diems aren't even the issue. The issue is in the lie. People go to wherever it is, whether it's Naivasha, Movoko, wherever it is. You are, it's already paid for. Your stay there is paid for. The per diem is intended to pay for that. That's what per diems are for. You are given so that you can pay for wherever you're going to
Accommodation.
stay. All that. That's what it's meant for, your meals and so forth. But in our case, it's paid for and then you're given a per diem. Now, you see, so you're paying twice for the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, that's where the waste comes in.
Yeah. And it maybe that's the easier one. But for example, the consolidation of a lot of government parastatals, that could be another discussion. So the point is, when we say austerity or when we say government, the size of government, where can we reduce it or how can we reduce it long term, not just for the next 5 years? Let's cut that.
But you know why this thing becomes an issue and a problem? Because we don't have the money to fund it. Okay? That's why it becomes a problem.
To fund cutting.
Fund what?
No,
To fund the
the
reduction.
numbers, the people, the what. We don't have the money for it. So we're saying, let's save money by reducing these numbers and doing this and doing the other and reducing this and merging and what have you.
Yes.
Now, I'm saying, okay, have that discussion if you must. But where is the discussion about how we can increase what we actually have?
Yes.
And the Ruto government is tax people more. And I'm thinking, hey, is that really the solution?
Yeah.
Shouldn't there be more for you to tax? Because essentially you're taxing the same thing more.
Yes.
It hasn't increased.
Yes.
You're just finding more ways of taxing the same thing.
Yes.
So essentially what you're in effect putting in place, you're reducing productivity.
Yes. So this is
Which
why.
means we'll produce even less.
Yeah. He has said people profit planet, for example. That's what I'm saying. Trade or sell, save, tax. In this case, the formula is that the taxation comes last. Yeah. Once you've grown your national cake, yes, and you have saved, mostly from a government perspective, you've cut down the size of government a little bit. Then you can tax, and tax itself it doesn't mean increasing your tax and mine. It could be what Kibaki did, expanding the brackets. Yeah, it could be. Yeah, essentially expanding to make sure that everybody chips in. Then,
You know, this same money that is taxed is the same money that we pay for hospitals, we pay for everything that we do, and yet the tax that we pay is supposed to have ensured that these services are available. You see where the problem comes in? So, you talk about wealth creation, it becomes a fairy tale.
It's a long tail.
Yes. So how are we going to, how do you create the wealth then?
Dr. Elijah Munyi, thank you very much for joining us. He is a political economy and governance expert.